Hi, everybody. Welcome to Next to Media. I'm Mike Shields. My guest this week is Conor McKenna. He's a partner at Luma Partners. Hey, Conor. How's it going? Thanks for being here.
Hey, Mike. Doing very well. Thank you for having me.
Great to talk to you now because I saw you last week. You guys put on your huge DMS event in New York, which was excellent. And there was a particular section that really caught my eye and I wanted to talk to you about it. So I grabbed you and, specifically it's about, I think it was interesting, and I'll let you frame the way this section came together, but I think that might surprise people. You guys were saying, as much as we talk about the creator economy and there's excitement around it and brands are doing a lot more there, that there's a gap in terms of time spent with that kind of content and advertising for a number of reasons. But I'll let you frame the conversation better than I have. What was that what point were you initially trying to make there?
Yeah. So I think, based on our conference, we do the State of Digital, and we're always trying to think about what are the biggest trends driving advertising and marketing dollars and technology. And a lot of times that's sort of channel specific, commerce media. We've talked about creator before as a channel. And what we were realizing this year is there's these sort of bigger underlying forces impacting all this around AI outcomes and sort of changes to the media consumption. And so that media consumption is a very interesting part, and that's where the creators come into this, where we're both converging around types of formats at the same time that we are, getting more and more fragmentation around creators and who's actually producing this content. And right. So this brings together different ecosystems, right? It's not just social, it's how these are interacting more and more with CTV, interacting with podcasts, et cetera. And so, part of the thesis is if you look at all those forms of media, Spotify, Meta, YouTube, and then, Disney and the rest in CTV, a bunch of these are converging more and more towards video and video distribution and sometimes, distributed on TV. YouTube's probably the best example where it really crosses the chasm of both these. They've got YouTube Shorts, which directly competes with Meta and TikTok and the rest. And then you've got, the fact that the most watched thing on the big screen in our living room is actually the YouTube app, not YouTube TV, but YouTube itself.
Right, where they're competing with NBC and Disney and wherever else.
Exactly. And now podcasts are, the biggest thing on YouTube. So it's like, they're the perfect convergence of all this. And what is underlying, YouTube, but creators, right? And that's not just YouTube, but it's also, Meta, even more so. And historically, we viewed these as wall gardens, right? They are siloed, they're separate. You go to buy them. Actually, ad tech has not done a lot on top of them because they're such controlled platforms that it's hard to make margin.
I want to ask you about that, but
sort of sitting in between them. But increasingly, when Meta was your social graph and YouTube was, UGC, creators had very little power because they only really used one of them. Now, as they're converging around forms, and creators are incredibly important to this dynamic, there's actually a lot more stability to these platforms than there used to be. And therefore, the fact that creators as an aggregate have, 20 billion of spend compared to 200 plus for the platforms that are all reliant on them is a very interesting dynamic because they're all moving towards time spent, but not time spent with, social. It's time spent with the same entertainment content that is across all these platforms. And so, then I always think about where's their fragmentation from supply for ad tech, because you need that.
That's an opportunity. That usually represents an opportunity, right?
And there's just mass fragmentation of creators, and what it means to be a creator has dramatically changed over the last number of years. And even, the number of players like yourself that have been historically part of bigger brands, increasingly are brands, along their own names, and are using that to drive, across this ecosystem. And so, that was the sort of fundamental premise there, which is there is this massive opportunity as we start to move forward. The buckets that creators binge, kind of like really bottom level affiliate or top, and sponsor content, start to go away, and they can be part of the, broader paid media ecosystem overall, is the, sort of big underlying thesis there.
All right. So a bunch of questions coming out of that, because I think it's super interesting. One of the things you talked about was how so many of the big creators, whether they might be a YouTube, by reputation or history, but they all kind of distribute on all the platforms, or lots of them do cut downs for TikTok and cut downs for Meta, or they build different, different genres or fan bases there. So that could be that theoretically opens a way to do a media buy across platforms all at once through a creator, but that seems inherently challenging because of the walled garden thing you mentioned. And then I want to just ask you about maybe ad tech's reluctance to try and get into this space. But what about the fact that these guys distribute everywhere? Does that change things?
I think it does. I think it changes the dynamic with the platforms almost more importantly than it does. The ad tech is then the next layer down from that. But if you thought about, Mr. Beast just being on YouTube, right? Then YouTube has a lot of control. And we've seen this with a lot of those platforms. They change their algorithms and things in the past. They're all now courting the same creators, especially the mega ones, to be on their shorts, to be in, making longer form content, to be making podcasts, that they have to bring more consistency to the creators.
They can't jerk people around like they might have been able to in the past, I guess.
As much. Yeah. Let's not say there's not going to be any jerking around and they're not going to do things.
And when there's only so many big guys. I know what you're saying.
So that's one dynamic. The other is we have seen this in, so we did this fundraiser for a company called ManyChat that someone invested in, and they do a lot of the chat marketing underneath Instagram and other platforms. If you comment X, you get this code and sort of that you get this one-to-one communication channel on Meta. But what's actually underlying that? Because a lot of their customers are creators or prosumers, where they use that to inform their customers or potential customers and drive them down the funnel. Is creators have been thinking for a long time about how do I move my audience to different platforms? How do I monetize them in different ways? How do I collect information? And so the more of that, they're using, shorts as just the top of their funnel, which then they will flow through to, okay, now subscribe to my Substack, maybe listen to my podcast, where then they'll monetize in different ways on those platforms. So they are thinking sort of cross-platform on all these different things, from what's the best from distribution to monetization to, maybe actually selling merchandise and goods. So there's that dynamic as well. So one, I think, is the platforms have to actually, manage competitors like they haven't done before. And then two, creators are leveraging all of these tools as if it's their marketing funnel. And that both those opportunities create opportunity for third-party tech to sort of sit on top of that, whether that's supporting creators or supporting the marketers and advertisers who are trying to get in front of audiences via these creators. Yes, they can do it by buying ad slots on YouTube or Meta, but if there's ways to do even more connecting directly to creators, which is really the powerful place to be, that's where they want to take advantage of it. And historically, that's been very tough. Just from it's been very services and workflow and challenges along those lines that just made it tough to scale.
I want to come back to that point. In general, would you say when you talk to brands and media agencies, is the spending gap? Is it because they're still, they're still kind of moving money out of traditional channels and it just takes time? Or do they say it's just really tough to buy creators at scale because of all those workflow things you talked about? Is it because they're just not sure about the whole space still and it's brand safety or it's weird? Like what is the big holdup, if there is one, you hear about?
Yeah, probably all of the above. I also don't think they think of it as a spending gap, right? I think they see that, the spend towards Meta and YouTube and other platforms is all going against that content.
I do that. I'm buying creators, right? I'm buying YouTube ads. What's the big deal, right?
Yeah. And they think of creators as the just pure sort of authentic voice component of, hey, this person is directly sponsoring and you get a lot of that authenticity control of it. You also get a lot of content out of it. People use creator content to then, repurpose and use elsewhere. So I think they all see the value of that. It's not super scalable today, right? You can't go execute, a massive buys across a wide range too easily. There's obviously platforms that have been working on making this smoother and more efficient. And there have been, some M&A deals around that in the last few years. So I think people are seeing that opportunity. It's still pretty disconnected from your other channels, right? You tend to be buying creators on maybe the reach expectations and frequency and things of that ilk versus what you might be buying from an audience perspective on, whether it's on the walled gardens or CTV or other channels as well. I think part of what's been tough to do is, I mean, this is tough in overall ad ecosystem. We talked about this too, is how do you tie brand spend to outcomes? How are you measuring the ROI across these?
Yeah.
The
That's
creator
particularly
space
challenging
becomes
with
even more interesting there.
authentic integrations are even probably harder to do than.
Well, you don't have the data. The data sits with the with the platforms. You don't have the ability to go do a geo test or any of some of the traditional incrementality stuff. I think with AI, there's going to be more and more opportunities to measure that in unique ways where you can drive that, and then also, make the workflows that much more efficient. We're already seeing some platforms, lean into how do you tie creator spend to, user acquisition costs so that you can buy it in the same way you might buy performance advertising, or how do you tie it to the context, and how do you know the context of a type of creator is really going to drive a lot more value. And there's some interesting platforms doing that on YouTube, as a first step. So that's where this starts to get interesting, because it's separate from the platforms. You can sit on top of them and drive a lot of value that's not happening inherently there. And then importantly, you give a lot more value to the creators, right? If they are driving the direct capabilities, they capture a lot more of that spend. And this has been particularly true as YouTube and Meta have pushed towards shorts, right? It's a lot harder to get credit for your monetization in a YouTube shorts than your YouTube.
It's such a confined space. Okay, so over the years, even going back to like the MCN days and when YouTube really started becoming a bigger player, like there's been attempts at trying to bring some automation to this category, make it a little bit more programmatic. Like, I remember companies having like a way you could buy like a ton of brand mentions in one shot, or some kind of affiliate thing that was like really quick to execute. But it seems it's inherently challenging when to do custom integrations in a space that requires a lot of integration versus like the way ad tech works. Why might that be changing?
Yeah, well, I think, creators are just becoming a much bigger part of the media pie today and the media ecosystem. So whether it's, you've got major TV stars that have now shifted and they're primarily podcasters and things of that ilk, that some is just getting more, enterprise driven. And a lot of those, purchases and sales, I think there's a lot of opportunity to bring more workflow to it, unlock a lot of that creativity. And one of the big challenges is it's host read and it's managed and all the rest. And you need to work inside guidelines. Like, you actually can't just take someone's ad and put it into your YouTube, video feed. That actually is against their compliance rules. It needs to be more authentic to that. But that space is way underserved. The number of people that are actively doing that into their YouTube videos, where it is still them, where they can capture a lot more value, is super low. I think same thing with Instagram and Shorts and the rest. It's very challenging. It's usually an entire part of your video, and so that workflow of aligning companies with influencers that can actually drive value and then make the review process and all the rest is something that has only been constantly improving. And I think it's even stronger when you bring in AI, where you can start to create stuff, review stuff, manage it much faster. So that's one component of it. And two, I think creators are going to start to just demand to be a bigger, piece of the conversation, and start thinking themselves in that way. How can they drive the monetization more directly instead of having it be controlled completely via the platforms?
Right.
So those two dynamics sort of move together. I mean, with MCNs, I totally agree. It was challenging. The thing is that, frankly, MCNs didn't drive YouTube. The, thousands and thousands of UGC creators really did, in the early days. That's because it wasn't the same form of entertainment. As it becomes similar forms of entertainment, the biggest players have big roles, and there's a lot more of them, and there's a lot more companies really building business around it, and there's better software and technology to manage it. So I think those are all, together making it more useful. But I think ultimately the fact of you can start to think of unleashing some of that creativity and tying it more towards outcomes and sort of using AI to sort of connect those dots. Then you can think of some of that upper funnel, creator dollars as paid media, right? Not just, sponsored
influencer budget or something
exactly.
special. Do you think there's going to be a wave of new investment where there'll be somebody's trying to come up with a buying platform that cuts across YouTube, Instagram, TikTok at the same time? Or is it going to be more about, automating the workflow across all these platforms, or automating product placements or measurement? Is it all the above?
Yeah, it's really all of the above. I mean, I think there's going to be, there's so many creators, going to be a million different experiments to be run. Different regions or different products are going to focus on different channels where they have, even stronger capabilities. But some of the, Unilever has said they want to 20x the number of creators they work with this year. Over 50% of their spend will be on social and creators. So clearly they're seeing a ton of value from the amount of time spent on these platforms. I think that only increases the, what creators could do with those platforms. And it doesn't need to be, I think if you're a creator today, your focus is not being isolated to one platform. So inherently, then you start to say, how can I, instead of doing, budgets for Meta and budgets for TikTok or whatever and different content, how can I start to bring that across my entire audience? Because that's really where I drive a lot of value for brands. And there's not, there's mass fragmentation of the number of creators you go work with from that perspective. Yeah. That's been a challenge to go, find that effectively, iterate on it, right? It's sort of test. It goes back to more classic, like set up the workflow, run it, test, get the report, a while later, or you've got the affiliate, super bottom direct response type advertising that you can see quickly, but is still, a challenge. So it's, a lot of these things are coming together at once.
Is this, how theoretical is this? Or are you seeing from the people you talk to, like some of the usual ad tech suspects wanting to invest in new startups in this world? Are the big, the incumbents going to start pushing the creators more? Like, what's going on in the market?
Yeah, I think it's, I would not say I'm seeing the incumbents necessarily focus on it. Part of the reason it was in our state digital is get people to think about this space in a new way. The agencies are definitely spending a ton of time thinking about it. Yeah. It's a huge area of growth. It's a huge area of focus from brands. And so it's becoming increasingly critical. I think there is a massive opportunity there. The notion of these businesses or these platforms or walled gardens becoming more stable platforms is something I've been thinking a lot about, even ever since I met the ManyChat CEO and we were talking through this concept. So I don't think that's realized in the ad tech landscape today. Too many people have been burned sort of buying on these platforms, but anyone on the services side has done a ton into creators, and increasingly there's very much actionable companies that are doing more in this ecosystem to either bring, better commerce capabilities towards creators, better workflow to, brands and creators getting together, starting to tie that from a measurement perspective to traditional forms of measurement so that it can be bought in the same bucket. I mean, there's a lot of that happening. I will say it tends to be more creator specific today. You're not seeing, the programmatic ad tech space isn't investing heavily there yet. I do think that what will be first is probably some of the measurement stuff, because if you can align it towards multi-channel and omni-channel, then it starts to open up that aperture. So at least from the overlap, right? Yeah. Companies that are measuring stuff there will start measuring stuff in this space even more. And then the buying always sort of is a flow down from that. It's not similar. I mean, we saw that with when it was desktop versus mobile, right? And now that conversation is
you can't measure it first, you can't buy it, right? I wonder, because that is there's a structural challenge there, that the budgets are parked in certain areas and they're measured a certain way. And then I guess the more that the Unilevers of the world say, we're going to do this, you got to figure out how to measure it for me, would help push things towards that paid media channel and let everything be apples to apples versus just like having these silos with their own metrics, their own KPI.
Yeah. I think that's right. I mean, I think as also take YouTube again as an example. Like if YouTube starts to be considered more like TV, which they're not today, there's a massive discount between a CPM on YouTube, just buying through YouTube, than there is buying on CTV, despite the amount of time spent and the fact that for YouTube,
they're still catching up. Yeah.
The primary device though for YouTube is the TV now, right? Yep. You just cover that gap, and that means that creators that are spending or that are distributing through that as their primary channel can get a big bump in the size of their business and value in the media ecosystem. I mean, that alone opens up the aperture of how they start to think about managing their business, what tools and technology they need, versus, I'm only focused on the content side of things and I'm going to go upload and I'll get paid whatever YouTube, pays me and really just focus on building audience. They start thinking about how to optimize that, right? So all those things are coming together at once. I wouldn't purport to have a crystal ball as to how it will play out. There's a reason I'm a banker and not a tech entrepreneur here, but I can more so we try to see like what is this 30,000 foot shift happening where there sort of creates the opportunity, and certainly there are some very interesting growth companies that are starting to tackle this area in big ways.
I wonder if regulation or the threat of regulation might actually help accelerate this. Meaning that like it's been a walled garden world and they've been sort of doing their things their own way. I'm not saying that they're gonna all be opened up to every single DSP, but if a Google gets broken up and if the others have to kind of follow suit, that would create more of an opening for an ad tech player to try and plug into all these platforms and do something.
Yeah, it certainly brings a whole dynamic into play. I think in the early days, it's going to be more of I think it'll be driven more by creators who are really leaning to try to help and brands wanting to optimize across, and they'll, sort of tape ways to do it together. I wouldn't view any of this as a discount on the platforms themselves, because I don't know that it's a value transfer, because the inventory that they control is super valuable. Yeah. It's more of a, broadening opportunity.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Right,
and they control the data, they control the audiences, they control the AI underneath these capabilities to determine what ad to show when, who,
right,
or what to show who when is still incredibly powerful, and that's not changing. No creator has that, right? But if they've got a really strong audience that they can capture, not just here, but sort of like reach them across their funnel and really inform even better purchases, there's a lot of power that they wield on intent from consumers. So.
When you talk to people about that and you show that slide, are people in the industry still are they able to wrap their heads around how much time spent is in this kind of content?
I think agencies definitely are. The ad tech ecosystem, not so much. But these are brand new slides, so this isn't something we've been talking about too much time. We talked last year about the importance of creators and sort of reframing what is a creator, because as I see it, sort of personal brand is becoming so important across anything, whether it's sports, media, politics, etc. And a lot of that is then spent on these platforms, but not just one, it's across all of them. And so influence is sort of spread across there. So I think people understand how much time is spent on these platforms. They still think of it as, oh, that's the walled gardens and I can't touch it or I can't manage it. There have always been the challenge is when they're siloed, it's just hard to break in. As they start to sort of align, that's where brands say, I need to manage across these more holistically. And especially if the time spent between them gets more, at parity, that becomes even more interesting. And so those are the dynamics. I mean, that in and of itself, whether it's through creators directly or not, opens up the aperture for what ad tech can do in the space. Commerce media opens up the aperture of what they can do with these walled gardens, because at the same time, and the Amazon is competing with TikTok and Meta more than they ever have before. Advertising is clearly a huge focus for them. They're making partnerships around doing direct commerce via Amazon checkout in Meta. And Meta's doing that because it's really freaking hard to get people
it's hard to get people to buy stuff on your platform,
build your trust, all of that. And so, commerce media is another avenue where ad tech is like, one of the biggest topics in commerce media is bringing platforms offsite, right? Bringing your demand into other channels. The biggest channels are, Meta and Google and YouTube. And
you're right. Social shopping is like treated as a total other, where there seems to be an opportunity to bring that together with the retail media space a lot more.
Yes. And so I think a lot of this is converging towards, okay, these platforms are incredibly important. There's more opportunity for ad tech to bring other capabilities on top of them there were before. And then underneath that, let's not forget, it's not just the platforms. There's a huge creator opportunity that increasingly is the foundation that these are built on. Like when Meta was a social graph and 50% of your time was spent with who you followed and generally there were people you knew, that was all Meta to monetize, right? I wasn't monetizing my friends looking at posts,
and
my
Sally's
dog,
posts
right?
are not
exactly.
up for
But as now, I think 7% of time spent on Instagram is with your friends, and over 50% is not even with people you're following. It's entirely just based on entertainment and interest. All of a sudden, that importance of creators to them is incredibly powerful and starts to change the dynamic.
Yeah, that's a game changer. Conor, awesome stuff. Thank you for helping speculate the future with us here and break this down. This is great conversation, and let's chat again.
Yeah, thank you for having me.